If anybody wants to ask a question, first of all, you can write it in the chat on the side, in the chat box. And if not, then at the end, if anybody has a burning question, then they can ask if something's not so clear. Okay, I'm just seeing blank pictures. Is that okay? Am I good? Everybody seems to be all right. Is everybody happy? That's the everybody should be happy. Okay, so good morning, Boker Tov. Hope everybody's doing well. I hope you had a meaningful Pesach time and together. And we're going to jump straight into the shiur. I want to show you. I'm going to here's the page. I hope that everybody can see that. Here's the page of what we're going to study today, which is Rav Kook Ein Ayah on a very, very well-known passage in the Gemara in Masechet Brachot, Daf Hey Amud Aleph.
אנחנו עוד לא רואים את זה, אנחנו עוד...
כן, אתם רואים?
אני במסך שלי, אני רואה את זה מאוד קטן משום מה.
אוקיי.
אוקיי, בסדר, לא, בסדר גמור, סליחה.
אני רואה את זה מעולה. אוקיי. So since we're in the sort of the Aseret Yemei Chesed between Yom Ha'atzmaut and Yom Ha'atzmaut, the Rav Kook obviously spoke a lot about Eretz Yisrael and the importance of Eretz Yisrael. But there's one passage that I thought was appropriate from Ein Ayah that Rav Kook speaks about sometimes the complexities of Eretz Yisrael. So the Gemara in Masechet Brachot, Daf Hey Amud Aleph says the following. Tanya, Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai Omer. Rashbi said, Shalosh matanot tovot natan HaKadosh Baruch Hu leYisrael. God gave 3 gifts to the Jewish people. 3 gifts. V'kulam no nitanam ki'im al yedei yisurim. And all of them were given with pain. They had to be accompanied with struggle, with yisurim, with suffering. What are the 3 gifts that came with suffering, or came as a result of suffering, or prior to their giving, there needed to be suffering? Torah, ve'eretz Yisrael, ve'olam haba. Torah, the land of Israel, and olam haba. That's the famous Gemara. And the Gemara that seems to be somewhat strange, that we'd have to have suffering before we can acquire things that are so intrinsic to the Jewish people. What are the things we have? Torah. How can we have to suffer before we receive Torah? Olam haba, the fact that we have another world, the fact that after this world there's another world, there is a world of the reward, as the Mishnah says in Masechet Avot, that this world is just a passageway until the next world. We prepare ourselves in a passageway to get into the next world. Why did it have to be through suffering? Why does this world need to carry with it suffering and pain? And the last thing, or the second thing, the thing that we're going to spend some time thinking about is Eretz Yisrael. Eretz Yisrael has to be through suffering. That seems to be somewhat unfair, maybe, because Eretz Yisrael is the intrinsic part of the Jewish people, the idea that we have a land of Israel. And so these 3 major gifts that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us, which are the land of Israel, the Torah, land of Israel, and the next world, all have to come through Yisurim, have to come through suffering. And the Gemara doesn't say why. The Gemara just says that's just the reality. That's how HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave it. The gift comes with suffering. And we could be a little moichel tovus and say, well, if we get suffering, you know what? I don't need the suffering. Forget the gift. I don't need Eretz Yisrael. I don't need the Torah. I don't know Olam haba. I can perfectly well continue being a good human being. I'll have a moral code. I will have a place that is my domain. And I will have, and then no Olam haba, we'll worry about it when we get there. Why do I need to have these gifts? Usually a gift is something that I enjoy, that I gain from, that I benefit from. Why do these gifts have to carry with them a suffering, a pain? Why is that so intrinsic to the element of the gift? And the gifting seems to be somewhat tainted by the fact that there needs to be the suffering that has to go together with the gift. That's the question that Rav Kook a little bit asks in the passage that we're going to see now. So I go back to, I'm going to share screen again. Go back to the to the page, and that was the Gemara. And the next passage, Makor Bet, is Rav Kook's explanation in Einaya. Einaya, you remember, is Rav Kook's book that he wrote on the Agadic portions of the Gemara. He wrote about the different types of Agadata, the idea, the deep messages, the moral messages that we come from the Gemara's collation, not only of halachic injunctions, but also of moral injunctions that are encapsulated in the stories, in the Agadic portions, in the non-halachic portions. And this passage obviously is not a halachic idea. The fact that the Torah and the Eretz Yisrael and the Olam Haba were given with suffering is not a halachic injunction, but it's a moral message. And Rav Kook wants to see what is the moral message that we can gain, that we can draw out from this passage. And Rav Kook says the following: Yesh ma'alot shem b'teva olam adam. There are acquisitions, there are achievements that a person gains naturally. That they're b'teva adam. They're the nature of a human being, that we get them naturally. Lefi shoresh yitzirato b'asher hu adam lasigam. And it is within the essence of the creation of man, that he is a man, that we can achieve them. So a person has natural ability and natural achievements, and a person can excel in those natural achievements, but they are natural. Says Rav Kook, and since they are natural, since they are part of the nature, we don't need to suffer in order to achieve them. So let's say, for example, a person breathes. So that's a madriga. I am alive, I breathe. That's such a natural thing that we don't even think about it. We're not even conscious of the fact that we are breathing. Since we're not conscious of the fact we are breathing, of course, we don't suffer from it. It's something that we have to make an effort to achieve. And therefore, to be able to achieve the ability to live naturally, I don't need to suffer. I don't need to put any effort into it. The same as a person who is walking. So if I want to walk, generally walking is a natural occurrence. It's a natural thing that a person does. We need to put in very small effort into it. If you want to be an Olympic walker, if you want to walk fast, if you want to be a runner, then you have to put a bit of effort into it. And that, as they always tell us in the gym class, no pain, no gain. The gain has to come from something that I'm out of my natural environment, my natural inclination. But something that's natural, I don't have to worry about it. I don't have to think about it. And we can think of many things that come to us that a person just has to make zero investment and very little effort in order to achieve them. And therefore, those things are the natural things that come naturally. I don't need to think about it. I don't need to look for air. I don't need to often look for food. We have food is something that is available. It's something that is generally not only food available in a supermarket, but generally food in the world is available. In ancient man, they had food. They were able to train the food. They were able to grow more food. They were able to produce more food. But generally, those things were available. Water, food, air are things that are available since they're natural. And therefore, those things do not require any effort, any suffering in order to gain them. That's the first line. Omnam, however, what if somebody wanted to get something that was supernatural, that was beyond nature? Then, that was higher than nature, that was better, had to develop beyond nature. And therefore, the regular forces of the body, the regular working of the body that is natural, isn't really prepared. And therefore I have to suffer. As we said before, if I want to become an Olympic runner, I don't want to just walk around the block, but I want to run, I want to be a marathon runner, then I have to go beyond the nature. I have to go beyond and above what is normal, what is regularly considered to be natural, and then I have to suffer for it. I have to put an effort to it. It's something that doesn't come naturally. And therefore, whatever is beyond nature is something that I have to work for. Something that is natural, I have to work for a little less. We don't think, nobody is conscious of the fact that our heart is now pumping, that we are now breathing, that we are now, that our heart is able to spread oxygen and oxygenated blood around our body. We don't think about those things. That's not something we have to put an effort into. But if I'm running, or if I'm trying to control my breathing because I want to conserve energy, or I want to slow down my breathing, then I have to think about it. I have to put an effort. Rav Kook says anything, and that's something we don't need Rav Kook to tell us. We can work it out, basically intuitively, that anything that is natural does not require a tremendous amount of effort. What requires a tremendous amount of effort is that which is not natural, that which is something that is beyond the norm, beyond nature. That is where I need to put an effort. And to put in the effort there, that's also where I will see achievement. That when I put in that effort, I will see achievement. It is unlikely that I can acquire, gain greater achievement in breathing. I'm an expert breather. People generally don't, breathing is not something in which we excel in. There are people who are able to slow down their breathing and to take much less oxygen. There are people who are able to have deeper breaths. But that, again, is something that I have to think about, that I have to acquire. And so that's a skill in which I must have put in effort. And therefore, anything that is natural doesn't require a tremendous amount of effort. But anything in which I want to go beyond the natural, I'm already pre-required that I have to put in effort, that I have to now work at it. And hopefully, when I work at it, I also I also gain something that was worth the effort. That's the idea. Ki'inyan, and Rav Kook is an example that's before we get into the explanation of the Gemara that we just saw. Ki'inyan, ha-nevu'ah shayta chala, such as prophecy that occurred. How did a person achieve prophecy? So we think, we read the Nevi'im, we read on Haftarot, and we read Tesha Shtayim Tesha, and we learn Tanakh, and we read the Nevi'im, very nice. They had this idea and this poetic language, and we discussed the metaphor, and we discussed the meter, and very nice. But let's understand how a person gets to Nevuah. A person gets to Nevuah, it is a tremendous amount of effort. Not only is it a spiritual effort that a person, the Rambam describes in Ilchot Yesodei Torah, how a person achieves prophecy, that a person has to put an effort and has to think and has to develop and has to spend years studying and has to train their mind and train their body. And then we get to achieve that level of nevuah. But Rav Kook says it's even on a physical level. That's what he says. Hayu evarehem mitparkim. Their bones shook. Their bones would disintegrate. As the Rambam explains in Ilchot Yesodei Torah, that a Navi would get to such an ecstasy, such a trance, that they would shake and they would quiver and their bones would break. Like we see in the Psukim, in Daniel and other places, that we saw that to get to prophecy needed a elevation out of the body, needed a tremendous amount of effort, and therefore, when a person achieved prophecy, they suffered on a physical level. Not only did they put an effort to it, they suffered on a physical level. In the same way you can imagine, we took the example before of a runner. So if a person runs 100 meters, and it takes them it takes them 2 minutes. Okay, so that's a good achievement, but nothing really happened. But if a person ran 100 meters in a few seconds, and they got to a 4-minute mile, or a person was a marathon runner, when we would analyze their body, they would be breaking down cells of their body in order to achieve that. I.e., that it had to come with a certain amount of suffering. Now, a person says, why would I need that suffering? Because as we said before, the achievement is worth it is worth the effort. That the effort that I put in will be shown why it was worth it when I have that achievement. And therefore it's worth it for me, although I realize that I'm going to suffer from it. As the Gemara says, that the Torah makes a person weaker. The Torah machlisha gufo shel adam. And therefore the Torah makes a person weak. A person can say, so I don't want to be weaker. I want to continue being strong. But if I see the end result was worth it, I wanted to achieve Torah, then I'm willing to have even a little bit of my own personal suffering. The same, says Rav Kook, about Nevuah. The Nevuah, a person's bones broke down. A person had a physical strain to achieve Nevuah, and therefore that was Yisurim, that was suffering. However, the Navi is willing to go through that and maybe even happy to go through that, maybe even seeking that because the end result is worth it. Says Rav Kook, V'akol mipnei, here we're here, she'nevuah hi lemala, that the reason that is the case is because Nevuah is a level that is beyond nature, that is unnatural. On a natural level, people don't become Nevi'im. Agav, that's interesting because it's actually a machloket between the Rambam and the Kuzari. The Rambam in Hilchot Yesodei Torah speaks about Nevuah, as we just said, being the pinnacle of spiritual achievement. And the first level is being able to learn Torah, conquering Torah, knowing Torah, developing Torah, recognizing God, understanding God, achieving Nevuah. That's the highest pinnacle. And therefore, it's an unnatural thing, as the Rambam says. However, the Kuzari, Rabbi Yehuda Levi, in the Kuzari seems to have a slightly different approach. And the Kuzari's approach is that there are certain people who are born with a natural Nevuah ability. They have a certain ability to become Nevi'im. Now, of course, if they don't develop it, they won't become Nevi'im. But they have, it's sort of part of their makeup that they're able to have Nevuah. I thought about it quite extensively recently. Can we imagine that there is a there's a religious gene, that there's a gene in a person's body that gives a person a certain leaning, a certain inclination to be more spiritual? Because if you would take two people and they have the same achievement, they've been through the same education system, they have the same parent, the same background. One is more spiritual, one's less spiritual. Could we say that there's a genetic element to that? Yes or no? I don't have an answer to that, but that's sort of similar to maybe the machloket between the Rambam and the Rabbi Yehuda Levi as to whether Nevuah is something that a person works at but has zero natural inclination. That seems to be what the Rambam says. Or like Rabbi Yehuda Levi, that it's something that has a natural inclination. Okay, we're going to continue. It says Rav Kook, Ein aguf hativi mekabla ki im al yidei yisurim. Since Nevuah is not natural, since Nevuah is not the natural state of a human being, and therefore to achieve Nevuah, to achieve prophecy, to achieve that level of connection with God, a person needs to have pain, because you can't have a non-natural achievement without having pain. You can't have that. It's impossible. You can't get to that. That his strength would be weakened and even broken, and then you achieve that ability to have Nevuah. Says Rav Kook that anything natural I have to work at less, and therefore there's less pain. But anything that's unnatural, to get to it, I have to get out of my comfort zone. I have to suffer. I have to make an effort. I have to have physical suffering sometimes, and then I'll achieve it. A person wants to study, for the bar, for the law exams. They spend many, many hours cooped up inside a library or cooped up in their studying. They are very tired. Their body will be weakened. You look at them; they'll be suffering from exhaustion, from terrible, from real fatigue, and yet only then will they achieve that. Only then will they have that effort that they said it was worth it. And so we see that again, that suffering and achievement often come hand in hand, because achievement is often something that is unnatural. We don't really praise people when they die and say, their shiva. We wanted to say this person was an amazing breather. or they had an amazing heart. Their heart was such an amazing organ. We don't praise people like that. Why? Because that's a natural thing. What do we praise people? That they were able to overcome the nature, and they were able to do amazing things, and they were able to overcome their inclination and to do chesed, or they were able to learn Torah, or they were able to overcome their inclination to keep their own wealth, and they were able to give tzedakah, whatever it is, and everybody has their own achievement that they've had. Everybody has wonderful achievements, but it's always to get out of nature, not to do something that is natural. We don't praise someone, oh, it was so tall. That's not a praiseworthy thing. That's very nice. A person's so tall, but that's not a praise. We don't praise people for that. We praise people for the fact that they were able to do something that wasn't natural. They weren't born. So that's the basis of what Kook now says about the Gemara. Al Kain, Eile Shlosha Ma'alot. Therefore, the three levels that we said we looked before, which is Eretz Torah, Eretz Yisrael, and Olam Haba. We already now understand where Rav Kook's going to go with this. They are all beyond nature. They're all beyond the natural. Torah, Eretz Yisrael, and Olam Haba are not the natural state. And therefore, they're beyond the natural state. And therefore, in order to achieve them, we need to make an effort, or we need to have some suffering. V'hinei, ha'adam murkav misechel guf v'nefesh. Says Rav Kook, there are three things in the Gemara that the Gemara says were achieved through suffering. We just established that what we mean when we say that was achieved through suffering. What we mean is that they are unnatural, or they're not the norm, and therefore to achieve them, we have to make a supernatural effort, and the supernatural effort means a little bit of suffering, and therefore these three things are supernatural. Well, there are lots of things that are supernatural. Lots of things why doesn't it say chesed? Why doesn't it say mitzvot? Why Torah, Eretz Yisrael, and Olam Haba? Why those three things? Says Rav Kook, that depends on the nature of a human being. Human beings, in Adam, the human being has an intelligence, guf, the body, v'nefesh, and the soul. We have an intelligence, we are our intellectual ability, we are our physical ability, and our spiritual ability. And while we could argue whether there is a difference between the soul and the intellect, generally in Torah and in Machshava, we think that there are. That the intellect is our intellectual ability, is our ability to comprehend, to understand things that are understandable. We spoke last time when we met before Pesach about asking questions. The assumption is that things are understandable and there's a logic behind them. That's an intellectual process. There's the physical, the body itself. And there's a spiritual thing which deals with the connection between us and the Kodesh Baruch Hu, us and God, which is beyond often our ability to understand, which is something very different. That's the nefesh, that's the soul. Says Rav Kook, these three things are now related to the three gifts that a Kodesh Baruch Hu gave us. Umitzad shloshtam yuchal liyot lo ma'alot shavot el hateva. And in all of these three, a person could have elements, could have achievements which are natural. A person can have an international ability. I was born with a natural ability, and that ability I used as a natural. I didn't develop it. I didn't go and study philosophy. I didn't have intellectual mind games. I understood what I understood. I had my life, and I was natural. Person is born with a body, and the body, I don't develop it. I just use it. It's functional, and that's it. And I'm natural. And a person's soul, person have, as we said, an intellect, a spiritual ability, a spiritual capability, a spiritual inclination that I never developed. I didn't develop it. I'm a good Jew. I go to shul. I give tzedakah, but I never really made an effort in a spiritual level. So we can have a natural achievement of all of those three. The person can have a natural achievement of their body, of their intellect, of their body, of their soul. V'gam, however, says Rav Kook, yuchal litromem mi'al chukei hateva b'shloshtam. But we're also capable of, in all of these three areas, elevating ourselves beyond the natural, above the natural, in an intellectual level, on a physical body level, and on a spiritual soul level. And what does Rav Kook want? What does the Kadosh Baruch Hu want from us? What does the Kadosh Baruch Hu want when he gives us a soul? What does the Kadosh Baruch Hu want when he gives us a body? What does the Kadosh Baruch Hu want when he gives us intellect? Does he want us to just live our lives using them on a natural level? Just, well, this is my natural ability. This is the way I was born. I was born, I wasn't a great runner. I wasn't a great thinker. I wasn't a very spiritual person. That was the way I was born. Is that where we want to be? Is that what the Kadosh Baruch Hu wanted us to use these gifts for? Or beyond? Did the Kadosh Baruch Hu want us to use our intellect, our soul, our body to go beyond nature? Obviously, I think you'll understand from the way that we asked the question and the fact that the question exists at all, that obviously the answer is very simple. B'Yisrael, says Rav Kook, but the Kadosh Baruch Hu, for the Jewish people, prepared them that in all of these three arenas, in these three areas, in these three different spheres, a Kadosh Baruch Hu prepared us, gave us the ability, gave us the capacity to go beyond our nature, in our intellects, in our bodies, and in our souls, that we have the ability to go beyond nature and to get to something that was supernatural. What are those? How does that work out? A second.
כן, יש בעיה? מה הבעיה?
לא, הכל מצוין.
אוקיי, סבבה.
הכל מצוין, הכל מעולה. Okay. Let's go back here. Okay, we're good? Okay. What are the abilities? Okay. Mitzad HaSechel, on an intellectual level, how did the Kadosh Baruch Hu give us the ability to beyond the nature? נתן להם תורה. לרומם השלמת שכלם למעלה מכוח הטבע. Kadosh Baruch Hu gave us Torah. What does Torah give us the ability? To elevate our intellects beyond nature. That a person who learns Torah has this ability to understand things that is beyond the natural. And therefore Torah becomes the elevator out of nature for the intellect. It's the intellectual treadmill that a Kodesh Baruch Hu gives us in order that we can go well beyond intellectual ability. We know that the world looks at the Am Yisrael forever, and including today during this terrible pandemic that we're in, looks at Medinat Yisrael, looks at the Jewish people, and says, they're doing pretty well. What is it? What is it about Jews that was able to make them smart and to have this great percentage of Nobel Prize winners and this ability to overcome this, to look ahead and to overcome this pandemic, and the Jews were excelled wherever they were intellectually? What is it? And we know, and we've spoken about this before, that there was a group in Korea recently who sent a team to Israel to find out about Limud Torah. How do Jews learn Torah? Because obviously what makes the Jews special is their intellect, and the intellect comes from somewhere. What is it? What's the factor that is the common factor for Jews' intellect? Is it Torah, Limud Torah? So they took a group, a film crew, and they went to Mir Yeshiva, and they filmed people learning Gemara. Filmed Chavruta learning Gemara. What is it that in Limud Gemara makes Jews intellectual? Makes Jews understand, have a great intellectual capacity. So I don't know whether they came with an answer, but I do know. I think that I translated the Gemara into Korean, and now if you're interested, you can learn Gemara in Korean, which is a very good way to learn Korean, because if you already know the Gemara, Baal Peh, and you learn the Korean translation, so now you are expert in Korean as well, which is not a bad idea. They say that that's the way Rav Kook learned English, was that he took a Tanakh and he read it in English, and then he knew English. Now that's not 100% true, because Rav Kook did not really speak English, but probably to have an idea of several words here and several words there that he could understand from the English Tanakh. Cholofen, So what does the Torah come to do in this case? What is the matana? Because we'll give us matana Torah. Is Torah really a matana? Torah is, at the end of the day, Torah is our obligation. It's a set of rules that we have to do this, and we can't do this, and we can't eat this, and we can't do this, and we can't have this experience, and we should only do this on this day and not on this day, and etc., etc. I don't have to bore you with all of the laws, the myriad laws that the Torah has. What's the matana here? What's the gift? The Kodesh Baruch Hu gave us this gift of Torah. What is Torah as a gift? The answer is very simple. Torah is, of course, a set of rules. Of course, Torah is a rule book that we have to live by. And in that sense, it's not a gift. The gift of Torah in this sense was that it's the ability that we have, it's our treadmill as we have, the intellectual treadmill that are able to get us beyond nature. That we'll be able to, if we study Torah, we study Gemara, we study and we use Torah as an intellectual uplifter, we will be able to achieve great things that are beyond the nature. To get beyond nature, of course, you have to suffer. And therefore, Limud Torah is a difficult thing. The Gemara tells us that Rabbi Reish Lakish, the Shimon ben Lakish, was the head of the bandits. And one day he's walking in the street, in the forest, and he comes to a river, and the river is bathing a very beautiful woman. So he jumps in to the river, and he realizes it's a man. And he says, the man sees this guy jump from the bank into the river. He says, your strength should be for Torah. Helech le'oraita. And Reish Lakish says to this man, who turns out to be Rabbi Yochanan, your beauty should be for women. So he says to him, I have a sister who's even more beautiful than I am. If you do tshuva, I know you're the head of the bandits, I know who you are, you're a famous guy. If you do tshuva, I'll speak to my sister that you can marry her. So Reish Lakish accepts the challenge, and he wants to jump out of the river back to the bank, and he's not able to do so. And the Gemara says, why? How come he was able to jump across the bank, but when he wants to jump back, he can't jump back? And says the Gemara, because Torah machlisha gufa shel adam. Torah weakens a human being. The amazing thing is that Reish Lakish had at the moment not learned any Torah. He just accepted upon himself that he wants to learn Torah, already became weakened. Because the idea that Torah is to get away from the natural. It's to go somewhere else. It's to be involved in something more spiritual, something more intellectual. And therefore, it does weaken a human being. Torah isn't to make us strong physically. It's to make us strong intellectually. And to get that, we need to have a little bit of that suffering. And that's the suffering that the Gemara says is Torah machlisha kocho shel ben adam, that a person becomes a little weakened physically in order to learn Torah. You can't learn Torah if you're still involved in weightlifting every single day. You can't do it. You have to, if to learn Torah, we have to dedicate many, many hours. And those many hours, again, causes, like we said before, a person going through the bar exam causes fatigue and lessening of being involved in the physical, developing of our physical body. And that weakens a person. That's Yisurim. That's the suffering. So to get to Torah doesn't mean you have to be sick. Doesn't mean you have to be poor. But a person needs to recognize that to get Torah, I need to do something I need to put an effort. And that effort is the Yisurim. And that effort, if a person has those Yisurim and goes through that, then they will also have that achievement. And we said a person's willing to have that effort if, in the end of the day, they have the achievement. So that's the first one. Umitzad haguf, that's on the intellectual level. Umitzad haguf, Eretz Yisrael, Eretz Gufanit. On the physical level, Eretz Yisrael is a physical country. We're all sitting here. We're in Eretz Yisrael, right? No, most of the people that are listening at the moment, we are sitting in Eretz Yisrael. It is I look out of my window, I can see streets, I can see trees, I can see houses, I can see hills. It's a physical place. It's Eretz Gufanit. Umikol makom yesh ba koach kedusha skuli lemala b'nyan haTeva. But still, It has a spirituality, or at least a kedusha skuli, a potential spirituality that is beyond nature. It is unnatural. This city, this country is a country that's unnatural. So if we lived in New York, we could live naturally. And if we lived in Melbourne, we could live naturally. And if we lived in London, we could live naturally. But if we want to live in Eretz Israel, if we want to achieve Eretz Israel, we have to go beyond nature. And going beyond nature means that we have to put in the effort. We have to suffer, because it's not natural that a person should have this spiritual element of a country. We'll come back to that in a moment, but we'll just finish the passage and I'll come back to that. V'olam haba, and therefore the next word, mitzad nefesh lizkot lemala elyona gvoa min hateva. And the olam haba is, how do we get the soul comes to the next world? How do we get to that unnatural, which is the next world? How do we get to that? We need to have the suffering. And therefore, since all of these three things, Torah, Eretz Yisrael, and Olam Haba, are speaking about something that's not natural, that's beyond our nature, that's beyond the norm, therefore, and therefore all of them must have been given through suffering. They have to suffer, because the suffering is the effort that we put in order to have that achievement. And that when we have the effort, then we have the achievement. That's the three things that we have. Torah, Eretz Yisrael, and Olam Haba. Torah, to have an intellectual, supernatural ability. Olam Haba, to have a spiritual, supernatural ability. And Eretz Yisrael, to have a physical, supernatural ability. That we have a physical place, a country that is just a regular country like every other country. And yet, it is in this country that we have not only a physical reality, but that physical reality becomes a spiritual reality. That's something that's unnatural. That's something you don't have in any other country. And lo bichdi, and therefore it's not by chance that whenever you come to this country, the people come, they feel something spiritual. They feel a spiritual elation. The people, not even Jews, the people come here, they feel. You go to the Kotel. I'm sure that, remember before this, we used to actually go to the Kotel, not only just watch it on webcam, you actually could go and sit and stand near the Kotel. So when we go to the Kotel, you see lots and lots of people there, non-Jews, who are praying, who are touching the wall, who are sometimes there in silent meditation. What do you see there? It's a wall. What do you see there? They recognize, there's an understanding. Here's something that isn't normal. Here's something that's not natural. Here's something that's beyond, that's above the nature. And to get above nature, you need to put in an effort. It doesn't come by chance. It doesn't come just by regular living your life. That is Eretz Yisrael. And I hope that we all recognize that. Otherwise, we wouldn't have left where we were and kept living in Eretz Yisrael. We wouldn't recognize it as an importance of doing such a thing, because the idea that we understand that Eretz Yisrael is something different. It's not just a physical reality. It is a physical reality, but not just a physical reality. It's a spiritual reality. There are those for whom Eretz Yisrael is just a spiritual reality. Yeah, Eretz Yisrael, one day when the Mashiach will come, we'll go to Eretz Yisrael. Or even when I'm here, but it's... this isn't really Eretz Yisrael, this is the state of Israel, but really one day we're going to have this spiritual elevation. There's some people for whom Eretz Yisrael is just a physical reality. It's a nice country. It's a country that we go, it has good falafel, and nice people there, and you can get a nice apartment in Jerusalem, and akol tov, and it's just a physical reality. Rav Kook's chidush, Rav Kook's novel idea that he said in what we just learned, is that not only is Eretz Yisrael a physical reality, it's also a spiritual reality. Not only is a spiritual reality, it's also a physical reality. And that fusing of those two together, that's the Chidush of Rav Kook. That's Rav Kook's novel approach that he had in the Jewish world. That was something that nobody was speaking in the same way. Rav Kook wrote this, as we said, in the 1880s. That in the 1880s, no one was speaking about that idea that the Eretz Yisrael is a physical reality, but also a spiritual reality. Rav Kook says, when we understand that, when we can comprehend that, then we recognize why it's important to have Yisurim. Because I'm only wanting to suffer if I know that there's a gain from it. If there's no gain, why should I suffer? Why would a person want to suffer for something that has zero gain for it? And therefore, there's only when I can gain, when I can understand what is the benefit, would I be willing to suffer for it. And that's the Yisurim. That's the somewhat the effort that a person has to make in. It's not easy to come to Eretz Yisrael. It's not easy to live in Eretz Yisrael. It requires an effort. It requires often a financial effort, a physical effort, a social effort. The person needs to make that effort, because in the end, what we achieve is something that is beneficial. But of course, it's not only beneficial, it's something that is out of the nature. It's something that's beyond natural achievement. We could live in any country and having natural achievement. The Jewish people could have been naturally achieved in other places. Why do we have to come to Eretz Yisrael? Because we want to go beyond nature. We want to get out of that. And that's really the essence of Eretz Yisrael. The Eretz Yisrael and Medinat Yisrael is where we recognize that our existence is beyond just the physical existence. In the same way that a person learns Torah, understands that when I learn Torah, I realize that there's a world out there that is beyond, that's bigger than the world that I can see today. In the same way that when we consider Olam Haba, Olam Haba becomes an idea for us, we understand that this is not the only thing. This is not, you live, how did the Greeks say? Live, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. I.e., and understand there's no next world. There's no other world. This is the world. When I understand there's another world, I recognize there are things that are greater than what I understand. There's a supernatural reality on a spiritual level, on a intellectual level, as well as on a physical level. And that's the essence of Eretz Yisrael. Ben Gurion said, David Ben Gurion, the first prime minister of Israel, said that anybody who lives in Israel and doesn't believe in miracles is not a realist. I.e., that we understand that Israel itself lives on a miracle. It survives, everyone. It thrives on being supernatural, on living on beyond things that we just can't understand, unlike any other country that we can't understand. And we see that also in this pandemic that we are living through, that we are suffering through at the moment. Is that the numbers of people getting sick and the number of people of dying, which unfortunately is too many in Israel as well. You know, there are almost 200 people that have died. It's much too many, and every person is an olam umoloa, is a world within themselves. But when we look at the statistics of how many people got sick and how many people die in Israel, and you compare it to almost any other country in the Western world, it's just unfathomable. It just doesn't make sense. It's not, how is it that so few people here are getting sick? How is it that so few people here are dying compared to other countries in the world? More people died in New York yesterday than died in Israel in the entire pandemic. Not more people, more than 2.5 times the number of people died in New York in one day than all the people in Israel. That doesn't make any sense. The numbers just don't tally. So on some level, maybe Ben Gurion is right. That if we don't believe in miracles, we're not a realist. That the reality in Israel has to be this physical spirituality. And in light of that, I wanted to share one more passage that we'll look at from back to Rav Kook. And this is a passage that opens up Orot. The book Orot is Rav Kook's magnum opus. It's his book in which he really discussed his ideas for what the Jewish people, what was happening in the Gula today. It is a collection of several different essays that are put together in a book, Orot, and it was published in Rav Kook's lifetime in the 1920s, and there were certain passages there that were so volatile that in fact there were public burnings of Orot in the streets in Yerushalayim because of some of the things that he wrote there. It was sort of very considered, I'd say, very volatile, very controversial. But Orot is really the basis of Rav Kook's philosophy about Eretz Yisrael, Am Yisrael, and every good and true Kooknik, you should be able to wake up in the middle of the night and they'll be able to quote the passage that we're going to look at today, which is the opening passage of Orot. We've seen it before, but it's always good to hear it again. Eretz Yisrael, says Rav Kook, it's up on your screen. Einena devar chitzoni, kinyan chotzoni le'omar, רק בתום מסעי למטרה של גדול כללית והפסקת קיומה חמור אפילו רוחן. Eretz Yisrael is not an external thing. It's not an external acquisition to the people, only as a emsa'i, as a means, lematara, for the aim of itagdut haklalit, of the general collectivity, v'achzakat kiyuma chomri or afil ruchani, and the physical or even spiritual existence of the Jewish people. Rav Kook here comes to answer the claims that were made by some of the Zionist leaders that Eretz Yisrael is important, but it's not the only things. We know that Herzl was willing to go with the Uganda plan. That when the League of Nations offered that instead of giving them Palestine, they would give the Jews Uganda, Herzl was all for it. And it was Echad Ha'am and Chaim Weizmann and others at the Zionist Congress who sat on the floor and read Eicha and said, this is the end of the Zionist dream. Because if you think that we will get as excited, and Weizmann writes about it in his autobiography, Trial and Error, that if you think that we would get as excited and as motivated about Uganda as we would about Eretz Yisrael, then you don't understand what Eretz Yisrael is. Eretz Yisrael is not just an external thing. It's not another thing that will keep us together. It's a place where we need, as Herzl writes in the Jewish State, that it is we need an area on the world surface that will be sufficient for our physical needs of our people. Rav Kook says that's not what Eretz Yisrael is. That you're right. We could be in Uganda. That's not what Eretz Yisrael is. Eretz Yisrael היא חטיבה עצמותית קשורה בקשר חיים ממש. Eretz Yisrael is a independent element that is connected with the life of the Jewish people. חבוקה בסגולה פנימיות עם מציאותה. That the essence of the Jewish people is bound together in its inner sense with the reality of the land of Israel. We couldn't be a Jewish people without the land of Israel. And if we take those two passages together, Rav Kook is really saying something very, very, very significant. That it's true that we couldn't have the Jewish people without the land of Israel. There would be no Jewish people without the land of Israel. Well, that's obviously not so correct, because there were many, many times in the history of the Jewish people, in fact, the large majority of the history of Jewish people, in which the majority of Jews and the center of the Jewish people was not in the land of Israel. That was the case when Yaakov went down to Egypt. That was the case when the Jews were exiled in the first temple, and the center of the Jewish people was Persia. So much so that when they came back to the second temple, there was a gate in the Bet HaMikdash called Sha'ar Shushan HaBira. The Shushan HaBira, the capital, Capitalina, was not Yerushalayim, but Shushan. That was the case in the second temple when the Jews were exiled and went to Bavel and refused to come back, refused to return. Ezra and Nehemiah had to force the people to come back. It was true when the center of the Jewish world was Suram Pumbedita. It was true later when the center of the Jewish world dispersed and became other places. And when the Jews came back to Eretz Yisrael, in the beginning with the Aliyah of the Talmidei Baal Shem Tov and Talmidei Agra in the beginning of the 19th century, most of the Jews didn't come. Most of the Jews, a lot of Jews supported them, but didn't come. They didn't come to live in the land of Israel. Later with the Teimanim Aliyah in the late 19th century, most of the Jews in Teiman did not come. And so the center of the Jewish people was only for a very small amount of our time, of our period, was actually the land of Israel. What does Rav Kook mean? How can you tell me that the land of Israel is so much tied up with the Jewish people when for many, many, many years and many centuries and maybe even millennia, the Jews were not in the land of Israel? I think it ties into what the passage we said before. Because at the end of the day, the land of Israel was given to the Jewish people to achieve a physical elevation out of the spiritual world, out of the physical world, to get beyond nature. That was the idea. That's why we have Eretz Yisrael. That is the essence of the Jewish people. The essence of Jewish people is that these three gifts are essential to what it means to be a Jewish people. That what it means to be a Jewish people isn't just that we are a physical reality. It's not that we're intellectual capacity. It's not that we have a spirit, but that we were given these gifts in order to elevate ourselves beyond the nature. And if you want to become the Olympians in spirit, the Olympians in body, the Olympians in intellect, that we were to be able to excel in these areas. And for millennia, Jews excelled intellectually, and Jews definitely excelled spiritually. But it's only recently that Jews have also excelled physically. that we're able to have this physical land in which the Jewish people has become back to being a physical entity. And that's really the essence of what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted, in that we should elevate ourselves in all of these three arenas, in the physical and the spiritual and the intellectual. And without Eretz Yisrael, we're only able to be involved in the spiritual and the intellectual, but not in the physical. And then when we come back to Eretz Yisrael, and you must have seen it as much as I do, that we are going back to having a Jew who also has this physical excellence. We see the Jewish, we see the Tzahal, we see its expertise, we see its physical ability. We see that it is copied by armies around the world. We're seeing now that our ability to create a country that also has a physical ability, not only in military, but also in agriculture, also in other areas in which the Jews are excelling physically. And so Rav Kook says, in order to be a Jewish people, we need to have a land of Israel. It's true that for millennia we would survive without a land of Israel, but we were only 2/3 the Jewish people. We were only intellectually and spiritually. We didn't have that physical ability. That needs Eretz Yisrael. We need to have that. And therefore, we can't just fit. The Eretz Yisrael is not just a nice place. It's not just being able to achieve something. It's not just a place where we can come and congregate. It is the essence of what it means to be a Jewish people. It says Rav Kook, therefore, we continue in the passage. Umitoch kach, אי אפשר לעמוד על תוכן שושכלת ישראל, and therefore it is impossible to understand this special nature, the skula, the special nature of the land of Israel, ולהוציא לפועל את עומק חיבתה, and to express the depths of our love of the land of Israel. Why do we love the land of Israel so much? Why do we feel this elevation when we come back to Israel? Why do we feel a spiritual elevation when we come back and walk in the streets of Yerushalayim? B'shum השכלה רצינית אנושית. In any rational, natural human understanding. Because Eretz Yisrael is not natural. Eretz Yisrael is not a land in which we live naturally. It's a land in which we live supernaturally. It's a land, as Ben Gurion said, the land of miracles. The land in which miracles become the norm, become the rationale. So we can't explain it rationally. Why do we love Eretz Yisrael so much? Ki im beruach Hashem asher aluma kula bichlala. Only by understanding the Spirit of God that's on the Jewish people. We can only understand what Eretz Yisrael means when we understand that this is the land where we can connect with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. This is the land where we can have that Spirit of God. Ba'at tivit haruchanit asher b'nishmat Yisrael. In the natural, spiritual nature of the Jewish soul. Again, it seems to be, and we see this a lot in Rav Kook's writings. Ein Hayah, as we've said many times, was a very early writing of Rav Kook. And therefore we see that often he takes an idea that he wrote in Ein Hayah and he'll develop it later in one of his later writings, or what is also a reasonably early writings, at least this passage. But Rav Kook seems to be discussing himself with his idea that he had there. In Ein Hayah, we said that the land of Israel is where we get beyond nature. Here Rav Kook says that's the nature. But the idea that we have a spiritual nature, that we have a land in which we're able to be spiritual, that's beyond nature. That's not normal to any other country, to any other race, but that becomes our nature. That becomes our DNA. That becomes our norm. The norm of the Jewish people is we don't think that it's strange that we have a country in which the physical is sort of the spiritual, and the spiritual is expressed physically. We don't find that an oxymoron. We don't find that problematic, because that's the nature, that's the DNA, that's what we are. And therefore, the state, we can't explain the land of Israel and our connection and our love without going beyond human intellect, without understanding that it must be something that's deeper. Shehi, that is the spirit of the Jewish people, that it is that which sends out its rays in natural colors in all of the elements of the healthy feeling, of the healthy emotion that we have. and it shines. It's higher shining according to the level of spirituality, of divine spirit that we have. הממלאת חיים ונועם עליון את לבב קדושי הרעיון ועומקי המחשבה הישראלית. That fills with life and a higher beauty, a higher refinement, the hearts of the holy idea and the depth of the knowledge of the Jewish knowledge. I says Rav Kook that idea, we can't explain rationally why we love Eretz Yisrael. We can't explain rationally what's the difference between Eretz Yisrael and any other place in the world. We can only do it when we understand that it's something that's part of who we are as a human being, as a Jewish people. The part of who we are as a different nation that's able to take Eretz Yisrael and take it to somewhere else, to be able to become healthy again. But again, healthy not just to be natural, but beyond the nature, to be able to take that physical reality and take it beyond nature. Weitzman tells a story I've told you before, but it's a good story. It's worth hearing again. That when he met the British High Commissioner at the League of Nations, and the British High Commissioner said to him, why are you Jews so adamant to go to Palestine? There are many, many countries in the world that are large enough for you to live in and would be as conducive to your physical welfare. And why do you have to go to the land of Israel? So Weitzman said to him, I noticed that every Sunday you drive across town to go to visit your grandmother. Why bother? There are many old women that live much nearer to you. Why do you have to travel across town? And the High Commissioner understood the answer and didn't bother him again. Can we understand our connection with family? Can I understand why I have this affinity to my siblings, to my children, to my parents, to my cousins, more than anybody else? Why I would do more for them than I would do for anybody else? Can we explain that? The answer is really no. It's not really that rational, that we share some DNA. How much DNA do I share with my cousins? Not a tremendous amount that I really feel b'chol of affinity. And to my cousins' spouses, I have zero connection with them other than that their children somehow share some DNA with my children. It's very tenuous. But that's the essence of what it means, is to be a family. With certain things that we can't explain naturally, we have to use supernatural understanding. It's actually very fascinating to see now. When we're all shut away in our houses with our children, which for many people is the greatest gift, to have time with their children, to have to play with them and speak to them and eat together. And for some people, that's the greatest hell, is to be with their children, to have to eat with them, play with them. It's very much depends on what's your attitude. How do you look at? Do we look at family as something that's a blessing? Do we look at it as a burden? And either way, we have to explain it. Why am I more connected to these little beings that are in here that I created than any little beings that are outside in the park that have nothing to do with me? It's hard for us to explain rationally on a natural level. We don't see that in many places in the natural world, in the animal world, that connection. Definitely don't see multi-generational connections in the natural world, in the national world, and therefore understand that it's something supernatural. We could say the same thing about our connection with Eretz Yisrael. It's hard to say why, if I would stand when I went to Lebanon, which isn't so far away, and not so different topography, but when you come to the border, you come back into Eretz Yisrael, back into Midnat Sef, into Kiryat Shmona, why you feel elevated and elated and you feel at home, it's hard to explain it rationally. Why, when I get off the plane in Bering, even before I got off the plane, remember we used to fly, we used to actually fly around the world. That used to happen now. It's all stopped. Maybe we'll get back to it again one day, who knows. Why is it that when already you can see from the window of the plane, you can see the coastline in Tel Aviv, I feel that excitement that I get home that I don't feel going to any other country in the world. It's something that we can't explain naturally. It's something supernatural. Says Rav Kook, to achieve something supernatural, we have to put an effort. That effort is what the Gemara calls Yisurin. Yisurin doesn't mean I have to suffer and feel bad and moan and in pain. Yisurin means an effort that I put in because I recognize it's something that's an achievement. It's a supernatural achievement. I want to get that. And therefore, Rav Kook says, and at the beginning we said of Orot, you should be able, every good true Kooknik should be able to quote this in the middle of the night after being woken up suddenly. To say that Eretz Yisrael is the essence of the Jewish people, it's not just a place. We'll finish off the passage and that we'll finish. HaMachshava al devar Eretz Yisrael. To think about Eretz Yisrael, shirak erech chitzoni, kedei hamat agudat ha'umah. To think, if we consider the Eretz Yisrael as just an external thing in order to get together a nation, just to have a place where we can live. Even when it comes only to strengthen the Jews in Galut, to say, well, we can still be Jews in the rest of the world because we don't need Eretz Yisrael. Eretz Yisrael is just a place where we can have more Jews, you can have more kosher restaurants, but it's not essential. So that's a good thing. We want to strengthen the Jews in Chuzatz. In order to strengthen those Jews, their nature, and to strengthen their belief, and their yirah, and to strengthen their keeping the mitzvot. When we do that, we want to say that, that's often, I think, unfortunately, Rav Kook already saw this 100 years ago. We see that even more so today, that it's a sort of a weakness of our shlichut, is that we don't want to speak about, you have to come to Eretz Yisrael. Eretz Yisrael is nice, but of course you can be good Jews around the world. Torah Mitzion will tell you that the shlichim go and there's wonderful communities all over the world, but our aim is to bring them back home. Why don't we just say leave them there? That's a good thing. We want them to be from where they are. So of course, when we do that, Ein la pri ara'ui l'kiyum. That isn't tenable. It doesn't have sustainability. It won't exist. It can't be that the Jewish people continue outside of land of Israel. Because that idea is weak in comparison to the strength of the holiness of Eretz Yisrael. It's true we can continue just to be intellectual and spiritual. That's true, we can. But we're missing out on a third leg, which is also the physical, our ability to elevate ourselves physically, and that we do need Eretz Yisrael. Ha'imutz amiti shel harayon hayadut begalut. But so how will we strengthen the Jews outside of Israel? How can we be good shlichim for Torah Mitzion? Should be a shir for the shlichim to Torah Mitzion, not only for the people already here. Will only be strengthened in its connection to the land of Israel. Only when the Yadut Chutz La'aretz realizes the center of the Jewish people is in Eretz Yisrael, will we strengthen the Jews in Chutz La'aretz. Rav Kook again is writing this almost 100 years ago, before the state of Israel. How much more so today? And I think they're pretty much clear today that any Jew anywhere in the world realizes that the center of the Jewish people is in the land of Israel. We've really achieved that vision that Rav Kook had, that nevuah that he had. ומתקוות ארץ ישראל יקבל תמיד את כל תכונותיו העצמיות. And when they have a hope for Eretz Yisrael and a connection to Eretz Yisrael, then they will have the Jews outside of Israel will have a strength, will have somewhere, will have an anchoring, will have a place to stand. Tzipiyat Yeshua, the looking for redemption, hi koach hamamit shel hayadut hagalutit. That is the strength of the Jews outside of Israel, is that they believe that we're going to get to Geulah, that we hope, we look and we see, look at the development of the state of Israel. Vayadut shel Eretz Yisrael hi Yeshua atzma. For the Jews in Eretz Yisrael, that's the redemption itself. That's not just a hope for redemption, that's the redemption itself. The Jewish people have this deep connection with the land of Israel. When we have a deep connection with the land of Israel, then we have an anchoring, then we have a place to stand on. When we're here, we're actually in the redemption itself. Why is being in Eretz Yisrael the redemption? Because it's only here that we can achieve the third leg of the strengthening of a human being and the strengthening of the nation that Rav Kook spoke about. Intellectually, spiritually, we can make great achievements all throughout the world, and the Jews have done that for millennia. So we said the intellectual achievements, and clearly the spiritual achievements, clearly the development of Torah, and the Gemara, and Halacha, and Machshava, and Kabbalah, etc., clearly excel outside of Israel. But it's only in Eretz Yisrael that we can have that third leg, which is the strengthening of the physical, of the understanding of the importance of having the body, having the guf, having the physical reality of the Jewish people. And that is really only in Eretz Israel. Why, therefore, said Rav Kook, did it have to come through Yisurim? Because the effort is something that I achieve when I do something that is supernatural, that I go beyond the nature, when I go beyond the norm. And that is when I achieve things. And so Rav Kook 100 years ago, more than 100 years ago, 140 years ago, already viewed really Eretz Israel as we would see it today. And this Yom Ha'atzmaut, which we are coming into, a very strange Yom Ha'atzmaut, in which we will not have the regular celebration of Yom Ha'atzmaut by going to parks and making barbecues and having family and watching the processions of Tzahal and listening to the Chidon Tanakh and the Pras Yisrael. The Yom HaZikaron, there will not be visits to the graves of the fallen soldiers, and we won't have the regular tiksim and regular memorials that are usually held. But the Yom Ha'atzmaut, in which we have to be able to look out the window and to celebrate Eretz Yisrael from our houses, and to look at Eretz Yisrael as in its essence of what is it that we celebrate on Yom Ha'atzmaut? What is it that we have to be proud of? And Rav Kook said there are three things that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has given us, three great gifts. But those great gifts are given when we put an effort to them. The three gifts are Torah, Eretz Yisrael, and Olam Haba. And Rav Kook said that those three gifts are on three levels. On the intellectual level, we have Torah. Torah is how we get out of being just regular, normal thinkers and to become super Olympian thinkers. That is the Torah. And therefore, in order to have that, we have to put an effort. That's the Yisurim. That's the slight suffering that we need in order to achieve excellence in Torah. In the spiritual side, we have Olam Haba, the belief that we're going to get to a next world, the effort that we have in order to navigate this world well, in order to get to the next world. That effort, that Yisurim, will help us to elevate ourselves and to get beyond the natural on a spiritual level. But Eretz Yisrael is also nicknamed Yisurim, is also achieved through pain. But that pain is an effort that we have in order to develop ourselves physically, because the recognition that a complete human being is not only intellectual and not only spiritual, but also physical as well. A great intellect with no body will not be able to develop so well. A spiritual human being without a body, all the mitzvot that we have are connected to physical things. And therefore, in order to be a complete human being, we need to have all three. We need to have an excellence and a supernatural ability in our intellect, that's Torah, an excellence and a supernatural ability in our spirit, that's Olam Haba. But we also need to have excellence and supernatural ability on a physical level, and that's Eretz Yisrael. Baruch Hashem, when we look at our windows on Yom Ha'atzmaut, we can really celebrate that and see that the Jews in Eretz Yisrael, that the younger generation who understand both the importance of an intellectual and a spiritual together with a physical excellence and achievements, they are really, as Rav Kook said, the Yeshua Atzma, they're really the redemption itself. The Jews outside of Israel will look at the Jews of Israel and say, that's what we're aspiring to. That's what we hope to get to. And we Jews who live in Eretz Yisrael, we're here. We are living it. We are experiencing it. And hopefully we are also enjoying it. On Yom Ha'atzmaut, we celebrate it. We get together in whatever capacity we're going to be this year, and we will celebrate by saying, Zeh Yom Asa Hashem Nagila B'Nisbech Habo. This is the day that God has made. We will be happy and celebrate on it by understanding that Eretz Yisrael is essential for the Jewish people to develop, not only intellectually, not only spiritually, but also physically. You should all live and well and be happy, and should have a wonderful, wonderful Yom Ha'atzmaut. And Bezrat Hashem, next Yom Ha'atzmaut, we're celebrating together, Bezrat Hashem, in the Bet HaMikdash. We're hoping it's going to be this Wednesday. There's going to be a big barbecue in the Bet HaMikdash this Wednesday, Yom Ha'atzmaut. And if, very, very unfortunately, the Mashiach has not yet come, then Bezrat Hashem will meet next time in Yerushalayim. Hopefully, towards Shavuot, we'll be able to bring Shnei Lechem also to the Bet HaMikdash. Shalom, shalom. Be well. Kol Tov. Shalom, shalom.
Okay, if somebody have a question, you can open your microphone and ask.
Maybe it was all so self-explanatory that no one has any questions.
Very inspiring.
Shalom, shalom. Be well.
Thank
Keep safe.
Thank you.